Breakfast Club viewers, welcome to episode, we think this is 48, but to be honest, we've kind of stopped counting. But yeah, who cares? But what we do know is that we are so excited to welcome back perennial fan favorite, Dr. Nathalie Nagalingum, the Academy's curator of botany. Welcome, Nathalie.
Hello, Laurel. Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming back. You were our very first Breakfast Club guest when we started this series back in April, and so it makes perfect sense to close out 2020 with you. And yeah, so I'm excited you're here, and I'm excited for this presentation. Will you tell us kind of what you're covering today?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about holiday plans. I've always wanted to talk about holiday plans, and now that we have this online forum, Breakfast Club, that you've created, I have the perfect forum to do it. So I'm really excited to share a few holiday plants with you all and tell you all about their history and how we use them and their botany, of course.
Okay, and I know that this is in your presentation, but I want to point out your mad skills by drawing everyone's attention to the lovely wreath behind you, which you have.
This way, no, that way.
Yeah, or flipped. Yeah. Sorry, what are you saying?
Oh yeah, so I did an online course with San Francisco Botanic Garden. And they picked all these plants from their collections. So these are like botanically important collections. And I made it into a wreath. And so this one, you can't see it, but if you looked close, you could see redwoods, leucadendron from South Africa, and of course, eucalyptus from Australia.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, well, we will dive in. And before I get out of here, I will just remind viewers that you can ask Nathalie questions anytime, because we're going to do the thing where I go away and then loop back at the end to ask them. So if you're on Facebook, leave them in comments. If you're on YouTube, leave them in the chat. And with that, I will give you your slides and get out of the way. Thank you again, Nat. See you at the end.
Thanks, Laurel. So I'm so excited to talk about holiday plans. And this is what the holidays look like for me, or have looked like for me for many years. So here is a video I shot last week. Here we have Santa. It's so great. You can see he's wearing shorts. Everyone's in their summer clothes. Everyone's a little bit weary of this really weird Santa. I mean, this is Australia. This is what Christmas looks like in Australia. We have really warm weather. Last year, we had the bushfires, and so that's why it's all hazy. But, you know, Santa is in shorts. Everyone's really hot. We have a barbecue for Christmas. We have seafood. It's very different. But we have these Christmas cards. Now I'm trying to advance my slides. Here we go. Oops, no. We go that way. Okay. But we have these Christmas cards that look like this, and this is what we use as our imagery for Christmas and for the holidays. Is, you know, we have Santa in his furry hat and his coat. We have winter wonderland, you know, with the polar bear and the penguin, and of course we have holiday trees with snow all over them. And it was really, I never really thought about it. We just sort of used that, and we've adopted that, you know, in Australia and really in sort of warmer climates. But it was only when I lived in the Northeast that all of these things kind of made sense. It was like, oh yeah, of course, I know that it's winter up there, but the fact that we have these plants that we use, like conifers, is because everything else has no leaves on them. And so this is kind of like, oh, it's all kind of like this sort of eureka moment that I realized there's a reason behind all of this. And so I kind of want to talk about the reasoning and the history of using all these plants today. And part of that history, it extends thousands of years. It extends back to the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Romans, and the ancient Druids. And so in their temples, there's evidence that they used evergreens as part of their winter solstice festivals. They believed that the evergreens were a sign that there will be life again during this really long, dark winter. And so, you know, what we're using today is really a continuation of what people have done for thousands of years. And so this is one of the wreaths that I made with the plants from San Francisco Botanic Garden. And so we have all these plants that we still use as part of our traditions. One of the plants that we use actually traces its use back to Germany, and that's Christmas trees or holiday trees. If we look back to the historical record, the earliest record of the use of Christmas trees was in the late 1500s in Alsace, which was it's technically France now, but back then was German. And so that history of Christmas trees started back then in the 1500s and extends up until today. And those trees became part of the Christian tradition. And really, it was only limited to Germany for hundreds of years. But it was only when Queen Victoria had her tree with her family, and you can see Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and their kids, that this picture was published in newspapers. And so, well, it was in black and white actually, but this is colorized. But this is what popularized Christmas trees in England and then later on throughout the rest of the world. And, just like today and in the past, royalty really, leads a lot of fashion. I remember in the 80s, I had a special a top with a big bow on it. And that was because, Princess Diana had one of those, and I thought it was super fashionable. And so back then, when Queen Victoria appeared in the newspapers with this tree, it was a really fashionable thing to do. And it was imported by her husband, who was German, and also from her family, who were also German. And so this then spread around the world, and it's continued until today. So this tradition that has spread around the world, and this is my brother, my younger brother, and his wife, and this is them decorating the Christmas tree. I forced them to take this very staged photo, I guess, which they're not too happy about. Claire doesn't look too thrilled with my photo. And so, we have Christmas trees in our homes all around the world. We also have these trees as public trees. And here's a tree in front of what's called Customs House in Sydney. And again, you can see it's all bright and pretty warm. People are in summer clothes. But we still have this tradition of decorating a conifer tree, even when, it's in a completely different climate. One of the most famous Christmas trees is the National Christmas Tree in DC. And the very first one was in 1923. So it's a tradition that's almost 200 years old. This one is actually a photo of the very first Christmas tree and the lighting of it. And so it's been a yearly tradition at the beginning of December every single year. The president lights the Christmas tree. And this morning, out of curiosity, I was like, well, I knew the tree is somewhere around the White House. So I actually looked it up on Google Maps. And this is a photo I took from Google Maps of that very tree. And it lies between the White House and the Washington Monument, which you can see there. And so if you look at the previous picture, that's from 1923 with the monument to the right. And if you look today, there's still the tree with the Washington Monument to the right. But it's actually a different tree. The original tree has suffered from weather damage, and so this is a replacement. And what they planted is the Colorado blue spruce, which is called Picea pungens. There are sort of backup trees that have been planted for when this one will die, but hopefully it has a long life ahead of it. And so Christmas trees belong to a group of plants that we call the conifers, and there's many different species of conifers. We classify conifers as plants that bear their seeds in their cones. If you think of flowering plants, their seeds are in fruits. So the fruits that you eat, like an apple or a pear that I had this morning, the conifers bear their seeds in cones. And I've got two little asterisks there because there are kind of exceptions. And of course, in biology, there's always an exception to the rule. And so one exception is that there are cones that are in non-conifer plants. And so the plants that I work on and that I love dearly are the cycads, and they bear cones, but they're not conifers. And also the other asterisk is that there are conifers that don't have cones. And so there's the yew tree, for example, and they don't have cones. But we designate conifers based on cones plus a series of other characters. I'm not going to nerd out with all the botanical characters that we use, but sort of broadly, conifers bear cones. We have about 615 species of conifer. There are not many that are sort of being named each year as new species. We seem to have discovered most of them. I love this. I thought I'd throw in some pictures of the Cal Academy collections. And here is a picture of a conifer that was growing in Golden Gate Park. And this is collected in the early 1900s by the Academy's beloved Alice Eastwood. And she was a curator just like I am. She was the second female curator. She was the second female curator in botany. And she collected this plant in the 1920s. And so you can see our collections at the Academy consist of about more than 2 million plant collections. And I'm just going to show you a few just today. And so we use conifers for a range of things. We use conifers, of course, for like pine wood. So we use that in furniture, we use it on our floors, we use it in buildings. We also eat and drink conifers. And so, for example, gin uses juniper. And so that cluster, that sort of dark cluster of seeds in the center of all of those plant products is juniper berries. I also put juniper berries in my stews as well. I love that scent and that flavor. Conifers are also used to make paper. They are used in perfumes and resins, musical instruments, and even pharmaceuticals like chemotherapy agents derive from conifers. So they're really important. Conifers have formed a really significant part of our floras through time. And this is from Dinosaur Train. And you can see a couple of conifers here, the very big, tall green plants. Before flowering plants, conifers were the dominant part of the ecosystem. And flowering plants have only been around for 100 million years. I mean, only, but for 100 million years. And conifers have been around for probably double that at the very least. And so when we think of dinosaurs, and you know, all those big herbivorous dinosaurs, you know, the big ones with their long necks and reaching up for trees and eating foliage, they were eating conifers. And so I saw this cute little tweet on Twitter earlier this year, and I thought it was quite hilarious because conifers were the main food for dinosaurs for millennia, or rather thousands and thousands of years. And so conifers, even though they've been around for millions and millions of years, many species are at risk of extinction. One of the species that is at risk is the Monterey cypress, and it's officially listed on these lists of endangered plants and animals as vulnerable. And so it's one of the sort of more threatened levels of extinction, sort of close to extinction. And here's a picture of a bunch of Monterey cypresses that I took in Carmel, and actually this is considered potentially the most photographed plant in all of North America. And it's that plant sort of standing out on the right, sort of, you know, with the two sort of pieces, the two bunches of leaves. And so this is actually the logo for Pebble Beach, which is a very famous golf course. I know nothing about golf, but I do know that Pebble Beach is part of the Masters series, sort of the pro golf series. And that tree is part of their logo, which they've actually trademarked. So a conifer is part of a very important trademark as well. Conifers include plants such as redwoods, and redwoods really early in the sort of settlement of California were used extensively. And so there's been a lot of clearing of redwood trees, especially the ancient ones. And so they were used for things like houses, And they were also used for building the railway. So the development of California owes a lot to conifers, and in particular to redwoods. And so we know redwoods as these really tall, sort of remarkable plants. And they're not necessarily the tallest plants on Earth, but they are pretty much among, you know, the sort of top categories of tall plants. We also have conifers as the oldest organisms on Earth. And this is Dr. Lauren Esposito. She's the curator of arachnology. So she's my colleague and a very dear friend of mine. And here she is with the bristlecone pine that she visited earlier this year. And bristlecone pines include the oldest organisms on Earth. And they've been dated, one of them has been dated to over 4,000 years old. I mean, that's remarkable, 4,000 years. Some of them are, you know, 2,000 years old. And so in terms of lifespans on Earth, conifers form some of the oldest plants that, well, oldest anything that are still alive today. Conifers are also found in a whole range of environments. You know, they can be in swamps like this bald cypress. And this is a picture I took while paddling on a swamp in Louisiana. They can also be found in the Southern Hemisphere. And so we kind of typically think about, you know, things like pine trees and junipers and cypresses as typical conifers. But this one is a Southern Hemisphere conifer. This occurs in Queensland in Australia. And I've found a picture online. You can see in the top right, that's what the leaves look like. They look very unneedle-like, which is what we kind of think of as typical conifer leaves. And again, this is me taking photos while on a trip. And so, you know, botanists, we love to go and see the plants that we're crazy about. And so again, you know, I was doing field work and took a day off field work just to see these plants in the wild. We also have other Australian conifers. And again, this is a picture I took. This is in Albany at the tip of Western Australia. So it's the southwestmost tip of Australia. And here you can see at the bottom left of that big Christmas tree is a tiny little person. So you can see how big that Christmas tree is. And this is a species called Araucaria bidwillii. It is one of our native conifers in Australia. And the cones are absolutely enormous. You can see here's a kid holding this huge cone. And inside of it are the seeds of the Araucaria. And so the seeds are absolutely enormous. And in Australia, the Australian Aborigines actually ate those seeds. So what they did was they roasted the cones and then used the seeds as a food source. And so when I worked in Sydney at the Botanic Garden, some of these cones were produced by the trees, and our Aboriginal liaison officer, he roasted those cones, and I tasted some of those seeds. And they kind of taste like a cross between pine nuts and potatoes. So if you've ever eaten a pine nut, you've eaten a conifer because it's from a pine tree. Thing about these big cones is that they're actually really dangerous. And so when these cones are dropping and when they're sort of ripe, there's actually people local governments will put a fence around the trees just to make sure that people do not fall, do not go underneath the trees when these drop, because these are really, really heavy. And people have been seriously injured by these cones. And of course, they cause damage to cars as well. So, just like in Australia, everything's deadly. Even our conifers are deadly too. And so there are a whole bunch of conifers out there, but really there are three main genera of conifers that are used for Christmas trees. So three main sort of groups of the conifers that we use for Christmas trees. And so what I'm going to do is give you like a little mini class about how to figure out what genus or what kind of conifer you have as your Christmas tree. And so the three main kinds are the pine trees, so Pinus, spruce trees, which are Picea, and fir trees, which are Abies. And I was chatting online with some friends of mine who live in the Northeast, and he coincidentally took one of those earlier photos of the snow a couple of weeks ago. And I was using all the sort of botanical ladder names with my friend. One's a botanist and one's not a botanist. And the other botanist was like, why are you using these botanical names? Can't you just say pine, spruce, and fir? But both of us were laughing because we were like, no, we have to use the botanical names. So pine trees, how do you identify a pine tree versus a spruce versus a fir? And so pines are the easiest ones to ID. If you look at them and you go up to the base of each individual needle, if you find that those needles are in a cluster, then you're going to have a pine. And so if you look at that image, if you look at the base, you have a cluster of 2 or 3 needles together, and those are pine trees. Any single pine is going to have that. We have different species that have different numbers in their clusters. So you can have 2, you can have 5, it can vary, but it's always going to be a pine if all the needles are in a cluster like that. If you have individual needles, then it's going to be either a spruce or a fir. And so you can see here in these images, individual needles are separate. If you look at the base, there's no cluster of them together. So you go all the way to the bottom of that needle and you don't see more than one coming from that point. So now that we figured out how to identify pine trees, then we need to figure out what's the difference between a spruce and a fir. And so there are 2 features that separate both of these. So the first feature is if you look at the base of the needle again, so you go all the way to the base of the needle where it attaches to the branch. If you find little woody bumps, then those are going to be spruce trees. And those woody bumps actually persist even after the needles fall off. So you don't even need to have the needles on there. You can have a look and see this is definitely a spruce tree. If you have a fir, on the other hand, if you look at the base of the needle on the branch, you won't find any bumps. And so we refer to that as being smoothly attached to the branch. And then the final character that we use to separate them is that spruce trees have in profile, so say you chopped one of those halfway along the length, the needle of the spruce tree will look square in a cross section, kind of like that. And the ends of them, the tips, are pointy. So you can see all those little pointy tips on all those needles for the spruce tree. Fir trees, on the other hand, if you cut them in half, halfway down, you would find they're really, really flat. So they would just be like that, or just actually more like this. And then when you look at the tips of each individual needles, the ends are rounded. And so that's a dead giveaway that it's a fir tree. And with that, I want to say that these are what we use to separate these 3 groups of conifers, which are used as Christmas trees. But these are not true for every single conifer species. So for example, there are some other conifers that have needles in a cluster. So this is just your Christmas tree identification guide. And so now I have a quiz for you all. So I put out a call with the other curators at the Academy and asked them to send me their photos of their Christmas trees. And so this is a photo that Rebecca Johnson, who is the co-director of the community science program at the Academy, sent me. And this is her Christmas tree here in San Francisco. They have a lot of presents. They're very organised. I have not wrapped my presents this year yet. And so she sent me a picture of her Christmas tree that is beautifully decorated. And if you look closely at the needles, you should be able to identify what it is. And so 2 of the features that you can see here are that the needles are flat in profile and they don't have a pointed tip. So the tip of each needle is rounded. And so I'll go back to the previous slide. So if you have a flat needle and a rounded end, then it's a fir tree. So Rebecca Johnson, her family Christmas tree is obviously a fir tree. And so conifers are evergreen plants. They pretty much almost all conifers are evergreen. And again, this is a photo that my friend who lives in the Northeast took a photo for me when I asked her to go out in the cold and take some photos of the plants. And so conifers are one of the very few plants that keep their leaves during winter, and so we call them evergreens. There are flowering plants, on the other hand. Most of them will lose their leaves. So if you look on the left of this image, you can see all the conifers covered in with their leaves, and if you look on the right of the image, then you'll see flowering plants that have dropped all of their leaves. And so these are kind of like two sort of generalizations. Conifers are evergreens and flowering plants are deciduous. But of course, like I said, there's always going to be exceptions to that rule. And there are flowering plants that are evergreen. And interestingly, well, probably not interestingly, but it's no surprise that some of those plants are the ones that we use in our holiday celebrations. And so one of those evergreen flowering plants are mistletoes. And so you can really see them easily here. Those big balls or those clusters on these trees are the mistletoes. And so if you look a little bit closer, what they consist of are a bunch of leaves, and some of them will have their fruits on them. And so mistletoes are actually parasitic on plants. And this is a picture a colleague of mine took in Virginia over the weekend. He was looking at mistletoe as well, and it's pretty clear here. You can see that the host plant has lost all of its leaves, and the mistletoe is there and it has its green leaves. And the thing with mistletoe is that it's what we call a hemiparasite. And a hemi meaning half parasite. And so if it's a full parasite, then it doesn't do photosynthesis by itself. It takes all of its nutrients from the host plant. But in this case, you can see the leaves are green. And so that means it's photosynthesizing and it's producing its own food. So it is able to sustain itself. And so it's called a hemiparasite. And so what mistletoes do is they attach to a branch of a tree, and then they will go down through the bark. And so the image on the left, you can see the white sort of spotted area represents the mistletoe. And so I've got a green arrow there. And it's sort of spreading out underneath the bark, and it's tapping into the food and the water resources of the host tree. So it doesn't necessarily kill the tree, but it does cause a little bit of harm to the trees. And so a lot of people do try and get rid of mistletoes if they do have them on their trees. And so mistletoes can actually end up on a huge number of species. And so another picture from our collections at the Academy shows this mistletoe that was collected in Austria, and it's actually growing on a fir tree. And so I love this collection because you can see the mistletoe in the upper part, and then if you follow the branch down, you can see the leaves of the fir tree. And so here it's on the fir, but traditionally the mistletoe that we use comes from sort of old English traditions, and those are the ones that grow on oaks. And so this is what we call a herbarium specimen, part of our collections at the Academy. But these plants grow pretty high up. And so I want to show you a pretty cute video of my colleague Jordan Metzger, who's a professor at Virginia Tech. And he actually went to collect some this past weekend. And so he sent me this video, and here he is trying to collect these plants using a variety of methods. So first of all, what he's going to do is, he's narrating, but I'll narrate for you. He's going to throw a ball to try and knock the mistletoe out of the tree. Oops, that's a miss. So that didn't work. So then he's going to try another method to get the mistletoe out of the tree, so that big cluster. So here he is going, this is like the big guns. Now he's getting the slingshot. And so this is another way that we use to get samples for our collections. And so here he's using the slingshot. Let's see how he goes. Nope, that didn't work. So he decides to go back to the first method of getting a ball. And multiple takes later, here we go. He hits it. Okay. So here he's actually able to, he hit the mistletoe cluster. You can see the thumbs up. And so here he's showing us the plants, the fragments that he was able to collect. And so here we go. And so these are some smaller fragments that he is then going to put in the press. You can see the herbarium press. And so that flattens the leaves, and you dry them, and then you put them on archival paper, and they end up in the collections. And so they'll end up in the Virginia Tech collections. And so how the hell do these plants end up all the way up on trees that high? And the reason is we have birds. And so the birds use these plants as a food source. And so this bird has a mistletoe berry in its mouth. And so it ingests the berry. So a whole bunch of different birds, and birds all around the world will eat the mistletoe berry, and then it will poop it out on a branch. And there's a substance within these berries. It's actually really sticky, and so it causes the seed or the fruit rather to adhere to that branch. And so from that point on, then that will germinate and grow into a plant. And the actual name mistletoe is an old Anglo-Saxon word that means dung and twig together. So it's like dung that is found on a twig, and that's the origin of the mistletoe name. They're a really important part of ecosystems, even though they can do, they do kind of are kind of detrimental to the plants that they're hosts on. They also form a really important part of the overall ecosystem, the overall forest in which they're found. So as I mentioned, the birds will eat the seeds, and so they're an important food source for birds and also other animals as well. And the birds that come and eat the seeds also end up pollinating other parts of the mistletoe. They pollinate the host plant as well. And so they're really critical parts of ecosystems, even though they probably wouldn't even think so, sort of given how sort of diminutive they are. In the US, Native Americans have used mistletoe as part of their food. The berries can be eaten, but again, please be careful and don't just go ahead and do all these things. And they also have used the stems in teas, and they steep them. And they've also been used medicinally as well. So to humans, they also been used as a food source. The ancient Druids had a close relationship with mistletoe, and they regarded the mistletoe as a sign of good luck, fertility, and so the white berries were seen as, let's say, seed to be sort of kid-friendly, seed of the gods, and it's because it reminded them of something, and so that they associated the mistletoe with fertility, and they also used mistletoe for medicine as well. And here you can see a scene of the ancient Druid. He has climbed up into the tree, and he has a sickle, and he is harvesting the mistletoe. And there are priests at the bottom with this large sheet, and what they will do is catch the mistletoe. And the mistletoe was so sacred that it was extremely bad luck for the mistletoe to even touch the earth. And so they got this sheet to prevent that from happening. And so that's all being looked upon by these Roman soldiers. Mistletoes also feature in Norse mythology. And so there's a story of one of the gods, or a goddess, goddess Frida, and she loved her son so much that there's various sort of incarnations of the story. She either made a deal with everything on earth, or she put a spell on everything on earth. And so the deal was that she said to everything on this earth, please do not harm my son. I love him so much. But one of the other gods found a sort of a loophole in this contract, and that was mistletoe, because mistletoe technically was not on earth. It never touched the earth. It was only on a tree. And so one of the other gods tricked another god and made a branch or an arrow out of a mistletoe branch, and that was the only thing that could kill him, her son, Balder. And so Balder died by an arrow to his heart made of mistletoe wood. And so you can see in this image that there's mistletoe that pierced his heart. And so it's not really clear. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but it's likely that it's unlikely that this story has led to our use of mistletoe and love, but it's possible that the story of the love of Frida so much so that has extended to our use of mistletoe as a sign of love as well. And so today we use mistletoe. We have a branch of mistletoe hanging above, and so the tradition is that you kiss under the mistletoe. And I love this photo. It's so cute. It looks so affectionate. And so the tradition is every time you kiss under the mistletoe, you have to take a berry from it. And so once the berries are exhausted, then there's no more kissing under the mistletoe. So you got to get in early to kiss under the mistletoe. And this tradition is also in a lot of our songs. I'm definitely not going to play any of these songs for you. But there's a Justin Bieber song about mistletoe. There is the song I Saw Mommy, as we say here, Kissing Santa Claus. And in Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas is also talks about mistletoe as well. So I wonder whether it is the most popular plant in all of our Christmas songs. I don't know. There are many species of mistletoe throughout the world, and there are about 1,500 species globally. We use different species depending. So over here in the US, we used a bunch of different species. There's another species in the UK or in Europe that are used, but there's different species and they look different. And so this is one an image that I found online of a New Zealand mistletoe. You can see the bright red flowers in the plant. And mistletoes all occur in the larger group of plants called the Saturnalia. And I love that because it has the word Santa in it. It's kind of cute. But it's the sandalwood group of plants. And so one of the mistletoes that I love dearly is the Western Australian Christmas tree. And as you can tell, I'm Australian from my accent. And so a few years ago, I went to do some field work in Western Australia just before Christmas. And it was remarkable. You see this dry sort of outback Australia kind of look like this, everything's got a brown and dark green. And then you see this blaze of orange on the trees. And these trees, called the Western Australian Christmas tree or Nutsia, are also mistletoes. And the bright orange flowers are pollinated by a bunch of insects, but they coincide with Christmas. And so that's why they're called the Western Australian Christmas tree. For the Australian Aborigines, they view this tree as extremely sacred, and they will not go near the plant, any of these plants, at any time of the year. But it's only at Christmas or at blooming time that they will go and collect the flowers for nectar, and they ferment that to use. But otherwise, it's seen as a very sacred tree. Just like all mistletoes, these are parasites as well. And what you can see in this image is that I'm trying to get the right color. The white, those kind of white rings are the haustoria, or the structures that the mistletoe forms, and it wraps around the roots of other plants. And so it's wrapped around the roots of these other plants, and it taps into their nutrients and also their water. It can, tap into trees, or it can tap into tiny little grasses. It doesn't matter. It will be a parasite to all of them. And so this is kind of different to the mistletoe that we use for Christmas, because this mistletoe taps onto the roots, whereas the mistletoe that we use grows on the branches and taps into the branches. So it taps into different structures. And so, of course, it's Australia, so you know we've got to outdo the rest of the world. And so this actually represents the biggest mistletoe in all of the world. And so these are huge trees. You can see these are kind of normal sized grasses. So these are really, really big trees. So this is a giant mistletoe, and it's the biggest mistletoe anywhere in the world. And finally, that last plant that I want to talk to you about is another evergreen flowering plant, and that's holly. And so, of course, it's very familiar with its red berries and its prickly leaves. There's about 450 species of holly. They can look very, very different. They can be evergreen, they can be deciduous, they can form trees, they can form shrubs, they can form climbers, a whole bunch of different appearances. And here we have a collection of holly that is growing in Golden Gate Park. And this was collected by somebody who worked at the Academy and who actually was, I sort of was looking at this label last night and did a bit of investigating, and he was a really famous Hawaiian musician and trained a lot of people and started sort of various groups here in the Bay Area. So not only was he a very prolific collector who added this beautiful specimen of holly to our collections, but he was also a really famous and well-accomplished musician too. And so the botanical name for holly is ilex. And so there's different species of ilex. This species of ilex derives from Africa, and so it's called the African holly or the Cape holly. And the wood of this is used to make piano keys. And so the wood is harvested and it's dyed to make the black part of the piano keys that we see in pianos. And so this is an example of holly wood that is used. And so then it kind of got me going down kind of into the internets and wondering, is Hollywood named after holly? Unfortunately not, so that was pretty disappointing. But we also use holly in other ways, and so this is another species of holly from South America, and this is used for yerba mate. And so the yerba mate is brewed into mate, which is used in South America, and we elsewhere in the world have been using yerba mate as energy drinks because they have this is a sparkling energy drink, but they have caffeine, quite high amounts of caffeine in them, and so they're used for energy drinks here. The berries are really they're really noticeable to us, and they're toxic to humans, and so they actually cause us to vomit if you ingest them. And so I love this species name, but botanists are very creative. So this is called Ilex vomitoria because it makes you vomit. But you know, again, like mistletoe, they're important parts of the ecosystem, and so birds and other animals will eat these berries and they aren't harmed by them at all. And the thing with the birds is that they will eat the berries and then disperse them all around, you know, in other places. And so this has caused holly to be a bit of a problem in some areas. And so we will plant holly in our gardens, and then the birds will eat them and disperse them to forest areas. And so in the Northeast, Washington, in the Washington state area, holly has actually started invading forests. And here's an example. You can see the holly in the foreground growing in a conifer forest. And it's become actually a weed. And so it's officially declared a noxious weed. On the other hand, holly can be really endangered. And so some species, like this Ilex ternatifolia, not this one, but there is a species called Ilex ternatifolia in Cuba that recently has become extinct. And so we have one hand, some holly species becoming a noxious weed, and the other hand, we have holly species becoming extinct. In the northeast, there's a species called Ilex glabra, also called the inkberry, and you can see why based on the berries here. And so it's on the threatened list, and it's been dwindled. It's dwindled so much in some areas that it's no longer there, and it's restricted in other areas now too. And so I've got my skull there in Cuba to show that it's completely extinct in Cuba, and then another species here in the eastern US, in eastern North America, has really dwindled in numbers and is on the threatened list. And so, as I showed you the inkberry, we have a whole range of colours of the berries in holly. Some of them are natural in terms of the species. They have different colours, and some of them have been bred, and they're different cultivars that form the different colours. So you can have a whole range of colours. You can have blacks, you can have pinks, orange, and even yellow. And the thing with holly is that if you're growing holly and you're wondering why your holly plant has not produced any berries, it could be that you don't have a female plant. And so what's interesting about holly, one of the many things that's interesting, is that the plants are either male or female. So if you look at the very top picture, those are plants with male flowers. And the top right, you can see the male flower, and those clusters, you have a spike, and then the pollen, or the anther, which bears the pollen, is at the top of each spike. And so that's the male plant. And then below that is a branch of a female plant. And so you can see the flower on the right, and that green ball is where the eggs are found. And so the pollen will travel to where the eggs are and fertilize it and produce the berries. So you're only going to have berries if you have a female plant. And you also really need male plants close by to make pollination happen. So if you're wondering why, in case you have a holly plant, that might be the reason why you don't have berries. And holly has been used for a very long time as well, like many of our plants that we use today. And in the Roman celebration, this is the harvest celebration, also coinciding with the solstice, they used holly as a decoration. It was seen as an emblem of the agricultural god Saturn. And so they used it to decorate their homes and their places with holly to represent Saturn. We also have this really long history of holly with the ancient Celts, and they believed that holly was a sign of good luck, and the underside of the holly housed fairies. And so if you deck the halls with boughs of holly, then you've got fairies coming to your place, and the very sharp tips of the holly, if you put that in your house as well, it stopped evil spirits from entering, because those pointed bits stopped the evil spirits. They caught them on there. And so for many, many years, we've used holly, and just like all these other plants, they form a really important part of our celebrations that extend for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so with that, I also want to give a shout out to all of these other plants that form a part of all of our other holiday celebrations. And I would have loved to talk more about them, but of course there's not enough time to talk about everything. But I just want to remind you that, as we all celebrate at the end of the year, we use plants in Kwanzaa. So for example, corn is used extensively in Kwanzaa ceremonies. We have poinsettia tree plants that we use. Those are originally from Mexico, and they have a very interesting and also kind of racist history. Well, not kind of, but racist history as well. We use frankincense and myrrh as part of our folklore for Christmas traditions, or the three kings when they went to see Jesus. They brought myrrh and frankincense, and those are resins from plants as well. In Hanukkah, we celebrate the miracle of the oil that lasted for days. And so and the oil is from olives, and so that's olive oil, again from a plant. And so we use plants all the time. So I hope that you all will pause for a minute and remember all of these important plants that form a really important part of all the ceremonies that we use and that we celebrate at the end of each year. And so with that, I wish you all a very brekkie, happy holidays, and I will take any questions. Thank you.
Yay! That was amazing, Nat. And you sent a bunch of people running to their Christmas trees to do identifications, including me. So very helpful. Thank you. I feel like a lot closer to my tree now. And it's a fir. Yeah.
Okay.
I know. And I think the takeaway here is that everyone should immediately go buy more holly, because we need a lot more pointy bits, keeping out a lot more evil spirits for 2021. So the holly market. Yeah. Okay. We do have questions. Also, I do need a photo of you in that Princess Di blouse before I forget. The first one is from Jason. So he asks, as a botanist, is there one species of conifer you think makes for a superior Christmas tree?
Oh gosh, no, that's the problem is, I mean, well, I don't even have a tree. So I can't choose.
Okay.
So for example, when I made the wreath, you can see the wreath behind me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a whole bunch of different plants that they gave us to use, and I was just paralyzed because there were so many options of plants, and it's like, do I use a juniper? Do I use a cypress? Do I use a red? And I was just like, oh my God, I don't know what to use.
Yeah.
So I can't choose. It's really terrible. And so I think it's a real problem.
Yeah. I mean, you love them all too much. It seems, it's not a fair question. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, so Panthen would like to know whether you're aware of any medical uses of conifers.
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned that there's a chemotherapy drug that derives from conifers. And so that has a really fascinating story where they found it in a yew tree. Mm-hmm. So it's Taxus. And this yew tree grows in South America. I forget the species name. And it has a really limited distribution. And then what they did was then go and say, okay, well, what's more closely related to this tree on our phylogeny, on our sort of family tree of plants? And this is what the kind of stuff that I do. I create family trees of different plants. And so they looked at the tree of the tree, like the relationships, and they found another species, the Pacific yew tree. And that grows, it's pretty abundant. And they found that same compound in the Pacific yew tree.
Oh, wow.
And so they were able to harvest that for quite a long time and get that drug, which actually isn't from the conifer, it's actually from a fungus in the conifer. And so that was then used to make that chemotherapy drug until they could synthesize it artificially in the lab. But that's one of the really important drugs that come from conifers.
That's amazing. And it's such a good illustration too of why like the work of mapping biodiversity and evolutionary relationships and all that stuff really matters. Yeah. Oh, so cool. Okay. So Liz would like to know whether it is possible to grow mistletoe without a host plant.
Not at all. No, because it's partially parasitic. Mm-hmm. And so what you'd have to do is find a host plant. So there are videos online of people who have like found mistletoe and then they put it on the host plant and they wrap it up. You can see they like wrapped it, so it'll grow. Yeah. But it doesn't have the capability to grow by itself. It's definitely a parasite.
Okay. And then so people were really fascinated by the mistletoes. Rhea asked whether mistletoes specialize in terms of what plants they attach to, or if they'll just kind of parasitize anything.
I think it's different. It's kind of different depending on the species. So some of them are kind of more specific, I guess. And then some of them are just really like whatever. Okay. So that, the Australian mistletoe, that big tree, that kind of is like whatever. And so I kind of found it a bit sad that even like this tiny little grass growing is going to get parasitized by this huge tree.
There's so many nice, I was just reading as well. There's so many nice just comments coming in. Like this talk has really made people reflect on plants that are involved in like their own traditions, whether they're family traditions or specific to country. So Gabrielle was just writing about plants, like thinking more about plants that are present in Christmas celebrations where she is in Venezuela, where they use plantain leaves. Yeah, it's really cool. So let's see here. So Julia asked whether, so I think she must have a holly plant that is not flowering because she wants to know whether it's possible to identify whether you have a male or female plant other than, in a way other than the presence or absence of berries.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you look at the flowers, you can tell. But if you're, I guess if you've looked for flowers, if you've never looked for flowers and it's never formed berries, then it's probably a male plant. Okay. But it just depends because maybe you've got a female and it never, there's no male near it, and so it's never been pollinated. So I guess my advice is keep an eye out for when it flowers, make sure it's really well fed, and then have a look and see whether it's male or female.
Okay.
And you can give it a new friend next year.
Yeah, like why not? Just give up and buy a company.
Oh, no, I mean buy a friend as in like if you have a female plant, then buy a male plant, or if it's a male plant, then buy a female plant.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I meant too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're on the same page. About these lonely always out there. I also realized I skipped. I'm so sorry, Becca. I skipped a mistletoe question, which was, do mistletoes provide any benefit, or is it always best to just remove it from a tree?
So they don't really kill the tree. They kind of they will benefit the kind of ecosystem as a whole. So maybe it's kind of a little bit detrimental to the tree, but they're not going to kill it because it's their host.
Right.
So in some sense, they want the host to still be alive. But they'll provide food for birds. So you'll get birds coming to your garden if you've got a mistletoe.
Right.
So I think it's sort of more a holistic approach to thinking about mistletoe.
Okay. And Susan just wrote a nice note about how your talk has motivated her to go out into snowy Portland, Maine to inspect and gather Christmas greenery.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And she asks, so she just asked a question as well, which is, do most conifers have a significant pleasant scent on their own? So that's interesting. Like, is there kind of a reason or a benefit to having such the smell that we appreciate?
No, I think so. Those conifers produce resins, and so that's what produces that really nice smell. And it's not so much for our benefit or anything like that, but they have kind of antiseptic properties in that it might help the plants, from keep them from infection and things like that. Oh, like microbial invasions. But not all conifers will have that smell. So it's more these sort of North American ones that have that nice smell. The ones in Australia definitely don't have a smell. They smell like leaves. Right.
So there's no warning before they drop a car-sized cone on your head. That was a big crazy. Yeah, like Australia really does never cease to amaze in terms of the way its nature is just like coming for you. No matter what it is. Yeah. So Danielle would like to know whether you have any advice on what to do with a poinsettia after Christmas if you're gifted one.
Oh gosh. So I bought one before Christmas, and it has been really stressful to keep it alive because if you've watched any previous breakfast club, I always confess that I'm terrible at growing plants. Yeah. And so it's been really stressful to keep it alive, and I'm pleased to say that it is still alive after 3 weeks. So I am the worst person to ask for advice on keeping anything alive and what to do afterwards. Maybe you can just plant it in your garden.
Yeah, I suspect she might be asking more like, how do you love a poinsettia after Christmas? Like, it's just so, it's so holiday specific. It's kind of like.
That's true.
Or maybe I'm reading into it because I also have this problem. Let's see here. So I'll just take one more, and this is either from Allie or Lee. So I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. And it's a nice one to wrap with. They ask, are there any overlooked plants that you think we should adopt as new holiday mascots?
Oh, well, I mean, coming from Australia, we have all these conifers growing there. So we have the Araucaria, we have the Wollemi pine, which is a species that was discovered only 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Entirely new species, entirely new genus. And so I would definitely say use the conifers in your area as Christmas trees. And I think that's what we should be doing in Australia, is using our own conifers as Christmas trees.
No, I'm afraid of yours. Yeah. Oh, no, that's lovely. Okay. I like that. Love the ones you're with. It's good. Okay, cool. Well, I would also like to say, so this is our last Breakfast Club of 2020, but we will be back in 2021. And Nathalie, I think you mentioned being amenable to a talk about the kind of plants used in cocktails. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. All right. I feel like we all might need some strong ones in early, mid to mid 2020 or 21. And then I also realized I just learned that you have this skill where if someone shows you a photo of their backyard, you can kind of assess their personality and or mental state. So we could potentially do that too.
I could critique everyone's backyard.
Yeah. Here's my look into your psyche. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, you're one of my favorite people in the world. I could not be happier to bookend this Breakfast Club season with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, can I say, Laurel, you've done a fantastic job this year. And it is not, for all Breakfast Club viewers, this is not in Laurel's job description to host Breakfast Club and to, chat with us. And so Laurel has done a really great job in, completely changing the face of Academy outreach by letting us all talk to you. So thank you.
Oh, that's so nice. I mean, yeah, I think our kind of MO from the digital team, and I should shout out to Christina Fong and Amy Wong, has always been to be as invisible as possible. But yeah, that's one benefit, I guess, of this is that getting to spend more time with scientists and also more time with the people who are watching today and who have watched all the other Breakfast Clubs. We've loved that. So we're going to keep doing it. So thank you, viewers. And thanks to every single person who came on Breakfast Club this year. And yeah, I guess we'll say happy holidays. Stay cozy, safe, warm, all of that stuff. And thank you so much.